Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It's titled, We're All in This Together, Marketing Management in a Recession. My name's Darren Woolley. I'm the CEO of TrinityP3, and I'll get to introducing my panel in a minute. But first of all, let's look at a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, again, thank you for joining us. We're going to keep this to 1 hour, so we'll finish right on the dot at the top of the hour. At any time you have a question, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function, because we'll be monitoring the Q&A function and make sure that we answer all your questions as we go through. We are recording this for future use, and there will be polls along the way, and it'd be terrific if you can participate in those to make it more of an interactive session. Okay, so now to get to introduce you to our panel, we have from the UK, Jeremy Taylor, who's Managing Director of TrinityP3 UK. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, everybody.
Dennis Flad, who's a partner at TrinityP3 Prospire for EMEA. Hi, Dennis. And Julian, Barrans, Business Director at TrinityP3 in APAC. Julian.
Hi, everybody. Hi there.
And, Nathan Hodges, who's appearing as the invisible man behind his title, who's Managing Director for ANZ. Thanks, Nathan, for joining us. Okay, so look, I think words like unprecedented and a time to pivot have been used a lot for the way we are at the moment. But even going into this, I think it's fair to say that the global economy was at best described as fragile. So now we're finding ourselves facing the possibility of the pandemic dragging most of our economies into a deep recession. Some dare say a depression, but let's hope not. So where and what can marketers do and their procurement colleagues do in this situation? You know, is there a possibility of being able to squeeze the agency supply chain even further, or are there other strategies? So tonight, the TrinityP3 Global Team, who I've just introduced you to, will be taking you through these strategies or the possibilities of some of the ways that you can actually make your marketing budget go further in the time of a recession. So with that, let's get into it. So starting with you, Jeremy, how is the economy there in the UK? And what would you say is the general business and consumer sentiment at the moment?
Okay, so the economy, the general picture here at the moment is going through some very rapid change. We had a big announcement yesterday from the government about the next steps of the complex process, and it is a very complex process the way it's been done here of climbing out of the lockdown. So a fresh round of restrictions are being lifted as of the beginning of next month, which means that things like travel and catering and restaurants and pubs are going to start coming back into business. So I think at the moment, the general business sentiment is that people or management teams are very focused on just getting business back up and running. I mean, that's if you talk to anyone in a senior position, their whole focus is how do we get the business trading again? How do we adapt to the restrictions? And that includes marketing teams very much. They're deeply involved in making sure that the business just continues to function. There is no question, looking at the figures that are being published, that the economy is going into recession. It's forecast to shrink by 17% this year. So differing views on how fast that might recover, but the signs are all backing that up. Looking at some data which I was tracking down over the past couple of days. So we're seeing very bad factory output from April and June. Weakest output since 1975. So lots of figures like that, which you'll see banding about. But we are seeing people saying that despite manufacturing slumps and disastrous trading figures, people are saying that there are signs of recovery coming from when the June figures are reported. June is expected to be far better than May. This morning there was some figures published, the PMI index, which looks at purchasing managers, which are showing very good signs of recovery, indicating we might be in for a almost a full recovery. People are saying by the middle of next year in most industries. So we're looking at kind of that depth of V-shaped recovery. So I think very mixed, different industries have different pictures, but certainly signs of optimism coming back into the economy.
Fantastic. Much better than a lot of the media is actually reporting. So Dennis, across in Europe and for EMEA, I know it's a large territory, but what's the general economic outlook?
Exactly, as you say, it's a large territory with a lot of different countries and different local governments. And I think one thing that the crisis really well showed is that the local governments are deciding how things are treated in their countries and how the economic programs are established to help each other. Apart what the European Union is now trying as well to help with a special fund in these things, I think, especially since this crisis, we're hitting a lot of the local communities heavily. I think that is where, as well, most of the activities are very well done. But we expect that the European Union, the European countries, they are expecting a drop by 7.7% for this year. Increase, there's a lot of forecast now for an increase in unemployment rates after the summer break, basically. So that for Germany, for example, they expect about 3 million unemployed. In smaller countries like Switzerland, for example, we expect 4.7%, cost at 3.8%. So you see, it will definitely derive into a midterm recession in Europe. Having said that, there are as well good news. Good news is that now the borders are open again, and travel within the European Union is possible, which is very key for the touristic industry now in the summer times, and so you can go to Spain and you can go to Italy and to Greece to make your summer break and summer vacations. Good news. Bad news is, and I don't know if you have heard that already, is that now you have first local lockdowns again. Especially some areas in Germany got badly hit, and now you have entire cities with 600,000 people are locked down again. And that is, of course, not a very confident sign for the near future.
I did see today that the EU is talking about banning US tourists from the EU. That will have an impact on the summer tourist trade, I imagine.
It definitely has, and I mean, a colleague of mine just jumped on his car and drove to Venice, actually, because he said, "Well, that's the time I can visit Venice without Americans and Japanese and Chinese tourists," and that is, of course, a thing that we're going to see. This entire international, intercontinental tourist business is not expected happening this year. Definitely not. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Dennis. And Julian, talk about diversity of marketplaces. I mean, the China market started coming out of, looking at post-COVID-19, and then Beijing has gone into lockdown again. What's happening in APAC?
I think it's a good point you made there. It sort of tracks what Dennis was talking about in Germany, and also what's happened in Australia too. There are flare-ups that are happening, and whereas a lot of the assumptions for recovery and getting moving again have been talking about COVID having been beaten by the time we get into the second half of 2019, it looks like it's going to take a bit longer. There are some stats that have been coming through that shows there's some underestimation of the level of hits to the economy. For Japan, for example, in April, they were forecasting an 11% contraction. When the data actually came through, it was 22% contraction. So I think the reality is there's an awful lot of numbers and forecasts that are being worked on here, and no one really knows. It's not the same as the global financial crisis recession that we had. The only thing that we are sure about is you can see every single country in Asia is talking about being in a recession, and it's the extent to that. So take China. They may technically get away without being in a recession. They may grow by 1 to 1.5% this year. That would be a 6-point drop on what their forecast was for 2020. Now, of course, if these numbers are a bit out, and if things like the Beijing scare gets worse or it pops up somewhere else, we could see China maybe going into a full recession and have negative growth. That would be far worse than the global financial crisis. Singapore, they're actually forecasting recession worse than when they went into independence in the 1960s. So way worse than the financial crisis. So we're facing something quite horrendous, and we'll all love to see these V-shaped bounce backs next year. I'm sure there'll be a bounce back. The question is how far will it bounce back, and what damage is it going to cause structurally to employment, how people can spend, whether people work, what's going to happen with capex with companies. There's all sorts of ramifications that are going to come from the change. I mean, we've all heard about the airline industry, tourism, F&B, they're all on their knees. There are businesses that are going to collapse and businesses that won't come back. So those people are going to need to find new employment. So I don't think the bounce back is going to be complete. It's going to be different. There are going to be impacts on not just businesses, but on the way consumers are able to react and will react in their spending patterns.
Thanks, Julian. On China, Nathan, they won't buy Australian barley, but they're buying Australian iron ore by the shipload. So how does that shape up for the Australian economy, and what's the current consumer and business sentiment?
Darren, long may China continue to do that, because it's what saved us from a recession for the last 29 years. Look, I'm going to irritate everybody by being relentlessly upbeat here. I think there's a lot of countries in the world that would absolutely kill for Australia's problems right now, because we've got around 102 deaths in the country and around 7,500 tops infections. So we went hard, we went early. Us and New Zealand seem to have beaten all the odds and taken advantage of the fact we're surrounded by sea and we're in the cul-de-sac right at the end of the world, and we're in pretty good shape. Now, as I said, it's the first recession that we've had in 29 years. So people have taken a knock, no doubt. We're down about 6% at the moment. But the other thing to remember, and you know, as Australians, we all need to remember this, even at the end of all of the government action to shore up this economy and to make sure that people don't do it quite as tough as perhaps they could have done, we're going to end up with a debt to GDP ratio which is way, way better than anybody else in the OECD. In fact, better than a lot of people had when they went into this pandemic lockdown. So we're in an enviable position. The issue here is around consumer confidence. And I think it's also around marketing industry confidence. There's an enormous opportunity here, because we are going to be one of the first out of this, even though it's stop-start to come out of this. And you know, we've got pockets of disease and lockdowns coming back. But the opportunity here is actually to start to experiment and start to test and start to learn, and to start to find out as a marketing industry what now has changed and what hasn't changed around the consumers and the economy that we work in. And that's what's going to be really exciting. But it's a question of making sure there's enough confidence to go and do those experiments and to make those discoveries and to adapt to what the new world looks like.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Now I'm going to ask you, the attendees, I'm just launching a poll now, which asks 2 questions. The first one is, how do you see the economic outlook for your market in the coming 12 months? And then secondly, how do you see the economic outlook for your organisation in the next 12 months? So if you could answer both of those. Here we go. So that's now launched. If you could respond and let us know how you see the market outlook for the coming 12 months and also for your organisation. There we go. People are responding. Good. So look, while people are doing that, I'll go back to Julian now. Julian, what are you seeing as the impact on marketing and advertising, particularly the impact on agency-client relationships?
Sure. I mean, the general feedback I'm getting is that where there are strong client-agency relationships and there's a genuine effort being made for each to work together under these difficult times, there's a strong bond building. The question is how much the agency is able to get in terms of fees, because there's a dramatic drop in spend that's been coming through in the last few months. Now, obviously, when COVID really hit initially, the spend was committed to and was happening. Well, now there's been lots of cancellations. And the general feedback is that the year's plan is now completely different to what it looked like before COVID hit. So there's going to be an impact financially. But what clients are telling me is they're trying to hold on to their relationships and keep working positively. And where there's a mutual forward movement through this period, they feel that they'll be able to reward their partners as we go into 2021, 2022, because they'll want to continue working with them. So that's very positive. I think the concern that's happening is, I'm sure that we've all got colleagues who are seeing that, there's been some redundancies going on. I've had a few resumes push my way in the advertising industry where they've lost jobs. So we could see a loss of talent from the industry over this year and potentially into 2021 as well, because it'll take a time for recovery to be able to re-employ or whatever. So that's a concern. Something I think we were talking about before, Darren, was about how we saw salaries impacted during the global financial crisis. And it took years for any type of recovery to happen in that area. So we could see that companies start to bring other people back on again, and we could see a hit there again. So one starts to worry about what happens with quality that agencies are able to offer while they're facing reduced income, and individuals are being asked to potentially work for less.
Thanks, Julian. I'm just going to share the results now. Economically, people finding it too unpredictable to say, but when it comes to your own organisations, generally, the majority of people are saying it's improving. So, thank you for participating, and that's a really positive outlook. So that's great. Thank you. Now we'll go to Jeremy. Jeremy, what are you seeing as the impact on marketing and advertising, and particularly client agency relationships?
Well, no question, there's a substantial impact. The received wisdom seems to be that there is an expected decline of about 13% this year in ad spend in the UK, which is very similar actually to 2009. Very slightly worse, but only a bit. Is it going to recover? A survey just run by Group M in the UK says that we should get, they think, a 13% recovery by this time next year. So there are different theories as to why this should be the case. No question that some of the hardest hit sectors in the UK have been kind of low spenders. So people like restaurants, which has been hit really badly, don't generally spend very much. So it seems that ad spend has probably held up. That's a huge decline. It's held up better than some people were expecting. Digital, of course, has retained, has been less affected by the offline. So forecast, again, as industry in general, is that recovery might appear by the middle of 2021. So the big impact, and the impact has been substantial over the last few months, particularly. So if I use that to talk about the how it's affected advertiser and agency relationships. So at the moment, the line I hear a lot, which is the kind of, I guess, the official line, is that there's kind of lots of positives people are talking about. In particular, people are talking up the benefits of new working methods. People working from home, clearly. I hear a lot of claims that this is giving better access to senior levels across agency and client teams, which means decisions can get made quicker. So lots of new work's been produced at very short notice and to very small budgets, covering off the specifics of where we are right now. We've all seen those ads about all being in it together, our theme today. So at the moment, there's kind of lots of nice things being said, but behind the scenes, there are less cheerful events going on. At the moment, we haven't really seen the full impact of it for us on the employment situation in the advertising industry, because huge numbers of people are furloughed. They are being paid by the government not to work. I think when we come out of this very soon now, when that scheme finishes, it'll focus people's attention on the real commercial impact of what's been going on, because scopes of work have been torn up. People have been doing work which was in no way foreseeable even in February or March this year. So how long can agencies continue to react to work with scopes of, with remuneration packages relating to scopes of work that don't exist anymore? They can't do it for much longer, particularly when they have to start paying for their staff to have to take decisions as to how they reduce or change their headcount. They are taking decisions on right now on whether people are going to come back to full-time working in offices. We're already seeing agencies renegotiating their office space contracts, for instance. People are assuming that it's here to stay, and contracts with staff being renegotiated. So a lot is going to change, I think, in the next month or two. This is actually a really good opportunity to be reviewing how that can be used as an opportunity by both agencies and marketing teams.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jeremy. Nathan, in Australia and New Zealand, I believe there's quite a bit of turmoil going on, and clients are looking around. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of activity that we're managing. There's a lot of activity in the market as well, in terms of agencies being challenged, pitched, tendered, moved around. I think, the observation overall is that circumstances like this, particularly for the marketing and advertising industry, they tend to be an accelerant of what was happening already. And it's something in the order of 5 to 10 years sometimes when you look at it. Depends which sector you're looking. But certainly, in a way, it's no bad thing on balance to shake things up, given that we haven't shaken things up enough in this market for 25, 30 years, because it's been pretty smooth sailing, apart from a bit of a bump around the GFC. So it's a very interesting market to watch. And it's also because of the kind of way that this market's always operated, which is, with this kind of can-do attitude, which became a bit complacent. It's great to see that back in terms of the way people are operating, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to do next, what the capabilities are that they're kind of maximizing and optimizing. It's much more a question here of kind of not, well, we can do that, or we can't do that. It's much more kind of, how the hell are we going to do that even more quickly than we ever thought was possible? And that kind of attitude coming back into the way that this industry works, I think it's going to be an exciting few months at least, if not year or so here. Again, I sound relentlessly positive. I don't think it's everybody in this country who feels this way, but then not everybody in this country's got the vantage point that TrinityP3's got across the industry. So it's, on balance, it's a really exciting picture in terms of, looking out 3 to 6 months from here, and what we could have changed, what we could do here in terms of marketing and how effective and influential the industry is.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nathan. Dennis, I know big territory, but what's the impact on marketing, and how do you think client agency relationships are faring there?
Yeah, I mean, in the short run, when all the lockdown happened, it was actually quite a busy time actually for a lot of agencies, because they needed to totally reshape the entire marketing material, so like big poster campaigns, for example, were not needed anymore, because there's nobody that could have seen it when everybody was locked down into their apartments. And definitely what we saw a lot is the shift towards online. and that a lot of the online channels had to be boosted. And I think that is now flattening down. So things have been reorganized there. And the big question is, what is the midterm impact? And as Jeremy said, COVID will definitely have some impact on how we are doing things, how we are behaving in the future. It will change our social environments. It will change our way, how we behave, what our demands are. So that will definitely lead as well that a lot of companies need to rethink, do I still following the right marketing strategy, or do I need to adopt it? And another thing that definitely the crisis or the COVID period showed is that online and offline needs more and more work together and being aligned. And that is, of course, something which is difficult when you have when you have a very fragmented field of agencies that you work with. So, and I think these will be the questions. Not only how we can save money, but as well, do we still have the right structures with our agencies to serve online and offline out of one common message.
So yeah, it's a terrific observation, Dennis, and Nathan, you touched on it as well, which is apart from focusing on the economic impacts and the recessionary impact that this is having, it's also creating a huge disruption. I mean, the working from home, people are embracing technology faster than ever before. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunities. It'd probably be worthwhile going around the board and just sharing some of the opportunities, or the one opportunity you think that this has created for marketers and their agencies to probably embrace something that they were looking or moving towards in the past, but this is actually accelerating the opportunity to embrace different ways of working. We'll start with you, Julian. What do you think would be the one opportunity or benefit or action that marketers and their agencies could take coming through this?
Okay, looking at marketers, I think that they're all facing limited budgets. So really working out and adjusting to focus on what's essential to do for your brand, or to drive growth in sales or recover market share, or whatever it is, versus the nice to do. So really taking a step back, looking at everything. Now, coupled with that, you're then thinking, well, okay, how do I reduce waste? How do I get best bang for buck? So all of that would direct you to sort of really mapping out your scope of work. And with that, you really need to think about who are the best suppliers for you to work with, because you really ideally don't want to have too many suppliers. So you really should look at roster management and how you can use that efficiently to analyze what you need, what you don't need, who's providing what, how you can really collapse things down to a core group that you can spend your money with that can help you achieve your objective, and do that with efficiency and reducing waste. We all know that from the work that we've done, there are prizes that are up to 20% in efficiency gains that you can have through that. So there's probably never a better time to actually get to grips with doing that. So start off with, what's your new scope? It was mentioned before by Jeremy and by Dennis about the more shift towards online. So, what do you need? And then who are the best suppliers for you to work with so that you can achieve your marketing objectives in this changed world?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Retailers especially that have been slow in the past to embrace e-commerce are now rapidly adapting e-commerce, especially with click and collect and drop and deliver, are now parts of in technology that they were dragging their heels on. And we've seen only in a few months, many of them quickly embrace this technology. Do you think, many people think of roster alignment or roster rationalization as reduction. Is it always reduction? I mean, are you looking at consolidation, or is it more about streamlining?
I think it's about streamlining, because if you really think about what you actually need to do to achieve your growth objectives, brand objectives, then that might be some different skills than you see your current roster having. Or indeed, one of the things that an agency should think about doing is making sure they make that the client understands all the capabilities they have. Now, a lot of the time, an agency has an arrangement that goes back, say, 3, 4, 5 years. And in that time, they may have built out their digital or social capability. And the client may not be aware of that because they weren't contracted to offer that service. So what's really key here is that agencies explain to the clients what they can do and how they can also adapt to this changing situation, and enable the clients, along with the agency, to streamline how they achieve things, how they work together more efficiently as well. So it's not about, oh, it's just an excuse to renegotiate and drive a better financial deal. It's about doing things smarter and more effectively in the marketplace to achieve the objectives that that's required by marketers to get their brands going.
Because you're right, we've got examples where we've been working with organisations across APAC where the roster is incredibly large, and yet from a marketer perspective, they only really think about a handful of agencies they directly work with. So this is probably a big opportunity for procurement, isn't it? To actually help the marketers clean up the backyard in a way, you know, all of the smaller suppliers that are actually taking parts of the marketing budget.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as you say, we see this a lot of the time, and a lot of it is about supplier creep that's gone on as requirements, expansion of digital capabilities that come online. It's a lot of new suppliers being brought on, and no one's really thought to look at them rationally and say, what do we really need to be doing? So it's a great way of taking a step back, and there's never a better time to do it. It's a bit like in many markets in Asia, we talk about spring cleaning. Well, this is a supplier spring cleaning to make sure we're using the right ones for the right job, and understanding first up, what is the job we want to have done, and then match the suppliers to that job.
So don't wait for New Year, Lunar
Exactly.
New Year, spring clean now. Thanks, Julian.
Yeah.
Just to remind everyone, you can ask questions at any time using the Q&A, and we'll answer them as we go along rather than waiting to the end. I'll just go to Nathan now. Nathan, what do you think, or what would you recommend as an opportunity for marketers and agencies at the moment?
I'll certainly echo what you were just talking about with Julian there, and I'll just quickly answer the question that you asked in a slightly different way. So is it an opportunity for procurement? I sincerely hope it isn't just an opportunity for procurement. I think there's a massive opportunity for marketers here, not only to work with procurement to be as efficient as possible, but then to take those efficiencies and plough them back into the marketing budget and the marketing effort with partners that are focused, that have a larger share and a decent and business-like share of their budget. Because marketing budget is how we'll all get out of this. And cutting marketing budget and cutting agency fees is how we'll stay in it for longer. And the worst thing that can happen is the agency say, yes, we'll take 30% less, and then we limp on for another few years in the same kind of mess. But look, to answer the question that you actually asked me, I think the one that springs to mind, and there's plenty, but the one that springs to mind, and particularly that might well have been profoundly affected by the changes in working patterns and working from home, is the whole question of in-housing, and how we manage that, and what the opportunities are there for efficient and effective and rapid service level agreements and delivery and all of that stuff. So, and I think it's something that's been on every marketer's mind, certainly in this market for the last 18 months, 2 years. I think almost every conversation we have, Darren, with any of our clients comes to this point at some stage in the conversation. But it's going to be accelerated. I just got this feeling it's going to be accelerated because suddenly there are different models available to both those people who manage in-source operations within marketers, and also those who partially outsource or outsource those production operations for marketers as well. So it's going to be very interesting to watch how the industry responds here, what new business models come forward. who's got the entrepreneurial guts to go and take the plunge and use the tech that's been developed and the skill set and the expectations around that tech that's now being developed, and just to see where that happens. So I think it's an interesting space to watch for the next 3 to 6 months, certainly in this market.
Okay. Particularly on in-housing, because we've seen it as quite a mixed bag trend around the world. You know, the US has certainly embraced in-housing of agencies. We've seen various brands look at taking media, especially the programmatic media in-house, and some of those then unbundle it again. If you've got in-house facilities, is there anything you think you should be doing now? And if you're thinking about in-house, what would you recommend as the best way forward at the moment?
Well, it's almost not a surprise that America's ahead of us here, because the budgets and the scale is so very different there from almost any other market in the world. It's easy to make the numbers stack up. Look, I think if you're already in-housing, or if you're thinking about it, or you need to address it, I think there are a few things you need to make sure you've got. You need to make sure you've actually got metrics and you're able to quantify and cost what is happening, because so many people set up in-house operations for production or for creative or for even on the programmatic side, without looking at the cost of the resources and the extent to which they're being used. So that's number one. And secondly, I think there's opportunity to review now, because of the fundamental changes in that kind of tech and that kind of facility and that kind of operation over as a result of the pandemic. I think there's huge opportunity there. So I'd say make sure you've got the metrics and the measurement for what you're doing, so that you can make a business case either way and you know what you're talking about when you come to analyze it. And secondly, at some point in the next 6 months, it's a competitive must to review it and make sure that you're working as efficiently and effectively as you can. After all, in-housing is rarely a marketer's core business. It's normally a peripheral, and whether they're good or bad at that is entirely an open question.
Yeah, there's been mixed results when you look at the productivity of in-housing. While it does deliver immediate cost savings because you're not paying the agency overhead, a lot of people overlook the actual hidden costs, the overhead costs of actually providing those services in-house.
Always, and it must be measured, otherwise you don't know where you are.
Exactly. Thanks, Nathan. Jeremy, what would be your number one pick for something marketers should be considering at the moment, or even their agencies? You're on mute.
Yeah. So just pick up on what's being said and what I said earlier. I think given that there's a huge focus right now, it has to be on what budgets are available, on scopes of work that are being reworked now, on agency relationships, whether they're existing ones or new ones that are going to come in. I think the big opportunity right now is to re-examine the basis of how agencies are remunerated and how they are inspired to produce their best work. So my personal view is that this is a great opportunity to review the basis of those remuneration packages. And I would advocate a closer look at moving to an output-based pricing model, a value-based pricing model. Reasons for that, because I think it's a very flexible, it can be used in a very flexible way, and as we have seen in TrinityP3, it can also produce savings in agency fees, quite substantial ones if used properly. If I just maybe expand on that a little bit, where we're coming from, of course, is which I've seen personally developing over the last many years in the agency world, is from a retainer-based remuneration model, which has actually largely been driven by agencies themselves, because it gives them a kind of a certainty of business going forwards. So retainers have become very dominant. They're based on the numbers of hours needed to fulfill an agreed scope of work. So it's all based on the input that is required from agency resource to achieve certain results. And all that is then topped up in various complicated ways, distilled into an overall annual retainer fee, which is usually divided up into 12 equal parts and invoiced out. Suits agencies because they can run their businesses with some confidence going forwards. And I guess it tends to suit clients in that there's knowledge of what's coming up and how things are going. It does cause problems, and it continues to cause problems because it's a really inflexible way of working. retainer is set annually. Over and again, we've seen situations where a scope of work is put in and agreed, and almost before the ink is dried on the signature, that scope of work is out of date because things move on. And right now, things are moving on really quickly. It's so hard to forecast what's going to be happening in 3-4 months' time, never mind in a year's time. So it's inflexible. There's inefficiencies get built into it, and it can actually be quite complicated to administer, because the more you try to measure the effectiveness of it, the more administrative time gets built into it. So I would advocate a change of emphasis and start to move to what we call an output-based pricing model. So what we mean by that, what I mean by that, I guess, is that you need to agree a remuneration package based on the projects, the projects that are going to be output by the agency. So different projects are agreed with a price against them and what they actually cost to fulfill. And the way the agency is rewarded is by what it produces rather than by what it inputs. Those projects could be as large as a whole new TV campaign, or it could be as simple as a radio ad or an email campaign, but there's a known value against each one of them, which is how the agency is rewarded. We can build in sophistication in that, in terms of whether it's a new origination project, whether it's adapting existing creative work. But what you need then is, therefore, so what drives that is an agreed pricing model, which both parties agree on. As a relative newcomer to TrinityP3, I'm personally very excited by the scope metric units, which we have available as a way of doing that, which is based on more than 20 years now of data, which we can use to benchmark how it's set up. So we can help people to build a pricing model with confidence, which lets them build this new model based on output rather than input. So I'm a fan of that. I think it can work really strongly.
Jeremy, one of the things that I've noticed, the conversations, especially in March and April, with both marketers and agencies, were around the retainer, because a lot of marketers had to quickly change their marketing programs based on the impact that the pandemic was having. And then suddenly, the agencies were dropping everything that they were doing, but then quickly picking up new work. And it was interesting, the two sides, because the marketers felt that the retainer, while it was convenient, felt like it locked them in a little bit. And the agencies were feeling like they were doing a lot more work in less time, and that the retainer wasn't covering it. So, it sort of exacerbated the problem that we've seen over many years with the retainer model.
I totally agree. And I think in my view, it's going to bring the whole thing to a head, because agencies have kind of put up with it, and clients have, to an extent, also put up with it, but have exploited it a little bit, because things have happened so fast and the whole world has been thrown into turmoil. It's not sustainable. They can't keep going. And I think, as I said earlier, I think as agencies start to feel the full economic impact of what's been going on their staff costs, it'll have to change. So if any good comes out of that, it must be it's a great time to review the whole basis on which these things are done. And it's really brought up to a head, as you say, this issue of scopes of work being thrown out the window and new things happening that people have no control over. So you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible in the way you respond to that.
Thanks very much. Over to you, Dennis. What do you see, or what do you think should be the focus that will help both marketers and agencies?
Yeah, I think what all my colleagues covered is very fair points. And I agree as well that retainers are more models when you are a ship on a very, very calm river going along. But when you go to a little bit wild water, then this is definitely not the right model to compensate agencies. And I think we are in the wild water at the moment. One thing, when I talk with customers, they all said, well, we had now a drop 20 to 50% in the first quarter, and the second quarter doesn't look better. And I think now the key priorities short term is, okay, how can we actually bring that dent up and covering it? And that means you need to focus your priorities in marketing. And we always prefer to say you need to focus on in a two-dimensional matrix. You know, on one side, you should focus now on the activities, the marketing activities that deliver you best performance. And the performance, of course, is marketing is an investment. So let's talk about return on investment. Which of the activities deliver you the best return on investment? How do you measure it? I think that is a priority or an aspect where a lot of marketeers probably don't have yet the models in place to really measure that one. And the second dimension is, of course, strategic. I mean, we should not forget that there is a world after all the short-term activities where people come back into a new kind of normal, probably, and then they are looking for orientation. When you, as a company, you struggle with providing your clear strategies, your clear orientation points around your brand, you're going to suffer. And I think this prioritization on what is strategically important and what brings best return on investment is definitely a must-do for all the marketeers. And how is that now impacting the agencies? Of course, it is impacting the agencies they probably have to do less, but with more impact on performance. And I think that is a thing that we should look at. How can we motivate that? How can we actually remunerate that as well for the agencies to deliver us performance driving campaigns, which brings us then to performance-based compensation models, which I think as well in wild water times as we have it at the moment is a key model to do.
It's interesting because you know, they were very popular maybe a decade ago, but a lot of performance models have fallen by the wayside, especially when it comes to hard metrics. You know, in fact, you find that a lot of performance metrics are based on incredibly soft metrics like you know, relationship satisfaction and things like that. Where do you think that this should go? You know, and is it for something for everyone? You know, could every marketer introduce this?
I think you need to distinguish what kind of performance you want to measure. I mean, there's on one side there is the investment you do. So basically, you're investing money into marketing, and there needs to be some impact that you see either on sales, on brand awareness, on your place on the shopping list of customers. That's the kind of fields where hard metrics come in. And on the other side, there are, of course, important performance measurements in the relationship. How well is the agency understanding you? How good is your briefing process? How good is the collaboration with agencies? Because that's as well important to get good quality work out of the agency. But I think you cannot measure them in the same model. So I think the relationship measurement has nothing to do with performance-based compensation or remuneration of agencies, because I think that's where really you need to go on the hard facts. And the quality of the collaboration with the agency is something, how you measure on one side, totally different. You use, for example, questionnaires, how to find out and really see where are the difficulties in the relationship. We have there, for example, the evaluating tool, which probably some of our customers already know very well. And then you really go and say, okay, how can we improve the relationship? But when you really want to pay the agency for, you should more focus on the hard facts. Return on investment factors.
In fact, we've had a couple of terrific examples, especially in direct response, where and e-commerce allows for this. Where you've moved to an e-commerce model or an inbound marketing model, where the customer's buying either through an online or an inbound call center, you're able to then measure performance very accurately. And I remember we moved a media agency onto, rather than a fee as a retainer or even commission, they were getting paid for each successful lead and acquisition. And when we moved them onto that for the first time in 5 years, suddenly the sales went up 250%. And of course, the complaint of the marketer then was that even though sales had gone up 250%, the agency fee had gone up almost 200%. So, I think it's something culturally needs to be embraced by both the marketer and the agency, correct?
Absolutely agree with that. I think it really needs to, it's a different way how to work together. Huh? So you are really measuring performance of the agency. But that means as well, when they do, of course, a very good job, you need as well be brave enough to compensate for them for that and give them the markup on it.
Yeah, terrific. Well, look, if there are, there's a question, which is great. If you apply performance bonus to campaign hard metrics as a client, you need to be good at setting targets and being able to measure well. What do you think of that? Well, I'll open that to anyone, but Dennis, particularly you. Do you agree?
Yes, I think that is where actually the struggle starts. I mean, that's where often marketeers are suffering in building the performance indicator measurement in a very constant way. So that means you really need to focus on, okay, what do I want to do with the campaign? And as you said before, Darren, for example, the example that you brought is, of course, very much a demand-driving campaign and activities. That probably would not work for a brand or awareness campaign. So it depends what you want to achieve with the campaigns, what you want to achieve with your marketing mix, and you need to be very clear about the key performance indicators you want to achieve, and then build around that the compensation model, and then measure it constantly. Really build a measuring framework around it. I mean, when we do financial performance in finance or in accounting, we have as well a framework that constantly measures performance, and that is what we often suffer and missing in marketing. That's why performance-based compensation models or remuneration models are not that popular.
There's Jackie makes a comment here that relationship performance is easier to measure. The fact is that I've actually been called in because the client had actually agreed to a relationship score as a way of paying the agency's bonus. And then when they were having some financial underperformance, they just scored the agency down on the relationship. So not only is it easier to measure, it's also easier to manipulate as well.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the relationship between agencies is as well as important as performance-based, but you cannot do both on the same framework. It's two separate things that you need to look at. It could be both part of the bonus, but then you need to be, as you say, you need to be very honest with the agency. When they are very good in relationships, they probably deserve a bonus, even though the sales figures are not justifying it. Yeah.
Look, 4 terrific ideas. I'm actually going to launch a poll, which I'm going to ask everyone to respond, and you can pick more than one in this, but it's got the 4 suggestions that you've put forward of potential things for marketers to do in the coming year, and which one has the most potential. So I'll launch that now. If you could respond to that while I just, okay. So which of the 4? So there's the roster alignment, value-based output fees, performance-based fees, in-housing, none of the above, if you think they're all garbage, or other. And if you do have something else, we'd love to hear from you, because just actually put this in the chat so that we can actually see your idea in the chat and perhaps just quickly address it. So panelists, you realise that you can vote as well. So, you know, if you want to vote up yours or one of your colleagues, that's fine as well. All right, I'll end the poll now. So interesting, sharing the results. The value-based output fees was just ahead, with 6 people voted for that, followed by roster alignment and performance-based fees. In-housing, unfortunately, sad fourth with 2. None of the above. Luckily, all of them were seen as valuable. So thanks very much. All right. Now, let's go to the... Look, we've made a recording of this for anyone to, and we'll be sending out a email in the next 24 hours with a link to the recording if you'd like to see it again. We'd recommend, if you haven't already, to subscribe to trinityp3.com/subscribe, because that way we'll be able to keep you up to date with all of the information that we've been providing into the marketplace, and also all the upcoming events. We've got another webinar coming up in a week's time. It's Media Investment in a Recession, Performance, Transparency, or Both. So it'll be an interesting topic to join in on. That's it. I'd like to thank our panel, Julian in APAC, Jeremy in the UK, Dennis in EMEA, and Nathan in ANZ. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this, this webinar. We hope you have a terrific day, and thanks very much.